Coming to you from the Tar Heel State, this is the Carolina Commercial Real Estate Connection, bringing you industry insights and hot takes from Carolina real estate experts, helping you begin, grow, and scale your commercial real estate portfolio. And now your hosts, Tony Johnson and Cameron Pearson.
Welcome to another episode of Carolina Commercial Real Estate Connection. Today we have Gordon Davis with Finn Advisors. Gordon, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. It's always good to talk to you and always great to share ideas.
Yes, sir. I've known Gordon for quite some time, and we connect a lot on a weekly call. And Gordon, could you tell everybody a little bit about yourself to get a background?
Sure. So I came up in the construction business, started to do work around the age of 15 when I wanted to date a roofer's daughter, and the requirement was that Saturday I had to roof with him if I wanted to take her out on Sunday. So, that's how it had to happen. So anyway, so that progressed, and I was fortunate enough to find a major in college that was building construction, which, it was right up my alley and exactly what I wanted to do. And so went to the University of Florida, got that degree, jumped out, and I spent a decade plus working at the general contractor level, working for large commercial general contractors, household names in the commercial construction business nationwide. And, had a good career, served as a superintendent, project manager, and spent a lot of time in estimating. And then after the Great Recession, when I came back into the workplace, I went on the owner's side. And so I built I worked for a number of owners. And when I got to the owner's side, I realized exactly why it was so easy to make lots of money as a GC, because the owners didn't really know how to put stuff together, didn't really know how to put a package together, didn't know how to manage projects. And so, I found a place in the market where I jumped out on my own, and I do contract owners rep work for developers and business owners and property owners. And, that's what I do on a contract basis, help owners that way and help contractors build projects effectively. And so they make money too. And so, and that kind of is how you and I connected. We have a mentor in common, Greg Dickerson, and I'm doing a project with him here in Wildwood, Florida, for a mutual client of ours. And I've got a number of projects here in Orlando, mostly multifamily market rate projects here in Orlando. There's a lot of that going on in the marketplace down here, and with all the influx of folks coming in and a lack of housing in general, and we just can't build stuff fast enough down here. So that's what I do. I spent a lot of time as a general contractor, and I've spent quite a bit of time as an owner now. And so so I just enjoy building projects. And my motto is that we all get out alive and we all make some money. That's the end goal. If we can work together again on a project, we've achieved a big goal, right? So.
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of times, just so people are understanding explicitly what you're saying. So GC side, obviously on the builder side, from the owner side, owner's rep basically is more or less, Gordon is, partnering up with the owners of projects and guiding them through the process and being an intermediary between the owner themselves and the GC. It's basically a consultant for the project to make sure the project runs smoothly. And he basically makes sure the communication is done the right way and the job is defined properly for someone who has money and has a vision. Normally they have that, but they don't have the intricacies of the understanding of construction, how to properly request bids from people. And so that's the big thing that Gordon brings to the mix in order for the project to go smoothly between the owner and the GC.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a big part of it. Like just as an example, the client that I mentioned before, former NFL football player has a big piece of property in his hometown, wants to develop it, wants to build something on it to hold for the long term, and knows a lot of people, and but doesn't know anything about development. He would tell you that too. So that particular client, his nickname for me is, he says that I'm the tip of the spear, right? So, consultant, the word consultant kind of gets a bad rap at times. I like to say that like I'm a consultant with running shoes on, right? Like, so, I do a lot. I mean, I do all of the heavy lifting and footwork for these developers. And, a lot of times they're on the call, but I'm running it, right? So, that's just what I do. So
yeah, you are the safety net to keep them from messing themselves up and going completely over budget and out of whack and having a messed up
that's right.
project, or picking a GC that is completely wrong for the project. Tons of
That's
different
right.
components that you bring, and then monitoring everything's getting done per the drawings and the specifications. So, what we want to do today, I think, is walk through that, and how you get out as how to draw in the proper GCs, how to send packages out to GCs, and then for GCs, how those GCs then also send out and get, proper proposals from subcontractors. So I'd love to just kind of let you go through all these things, and I'll kind of chime in as we go. So please feel free to get started.
So let's back up a little bit and how we got to this point with you and me sitting here having this conversation. And that is that I did a similar discussion with Greg Dickerson about a process that I kind of vetted through called the RFP and the build and the threads that bind them. And so, basically, if you haven't seen that video, I think you did post it out here, did you not, Tony, in this group?
I will put a link to that video.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Within this video, so you can look down below in the show notes here. It'll have a link to that prior video.
Yeah. And so that video is more so what I do on a daily basis. And one of the things, and then when that video kind of went out to our little crowd here, we got some feedback that was like, man, if you could do this to help GCs, understand how to better RFP to the subs and better understand the process with the owner, man, that would be great. And so that's kind of how we got here. And, in vetting through, we met weeks back, and I've said, I just can't figure this thing out. Let me go back to the drawing board. And in figuring this out and trying to put pen to paper on it, one thing that I realized is, and I think it's a pretty important point, is that, me as the owner, if I'm the owner, I have considerably more control over the process and how I want it to pan out than a general contractor does in that process, right? So, like, our clients and end users are like the marketplace and the equity partners and the banks. Those are kind of the people who we try to attract and keep happy during the process. So they don't care at all how we run the RFP process, right? But an owner is going to push things down on the GCs, like I went through in that other video, that kind of say, this is how we want to look at it. These are the options we want, the ad alternates. These are the different things that we want, to see. And so, we have the luxury of having kind of control over how we get our deliverable back, right? And so you guys as the GCs, and when I was a GC, I felt this too, like, there are pressures to try and figure out how to communicate that to the submarket to get it back, the way that you want to see it too, right? And I kind of, over the years, when I was the general contractor, I spent most of my time in the pre-construction department, running bids and running those departments and stuff like that. And so over the years, I've kind of developed some spreadsheets and some processes that I think are valuable to share today. And, one of those that, I have a list here, a brief outline, and I just want to run through it. And so, like you said, I'm going to kind of say, here's me as the owner, this is why I would want this situation, and here's how you can best respond as a GC, right?
Yeah.
So, all of this starts with relationships, right? And so, it all starts with relationships, and business relationships are defined by contracts. And then the RFP process is then, further defined by what contract types, you're talking about eventually going to with an owner, right? And so, you guys as the GC, I remember, like, you have all sorts of different owners. You have some owners who are very sophisticated like me, and then you have some owners who just they don't know anything that they're doing, and they just kind of send you to the architect to get the drawings, and they don't really have a bid date even. It's kind of a mess, right? And so I think it's important.
They haven't even looked at the drawings. They just said,
They wouldn't know what they're looking at anyways, right? So, and hey, that's a client, right? And so, one of the things that I was really good about doing when I was in the pre-construction role was, like, I looked at myself like the technical side of the sales, like the business developer. He was the partier, right? So he'd just go out and he'd hit every event, he'd party, and he didn't know anything about, construction. Again, I worked for fairly sizable general contractors.
They know how to go out and schmooze. They love to go to every
and that's
party.
their job. If they're good at that, that's their job, right? And so sometimes, when I was
details.
Yeah, when I was looking at, when I was sitting behind my spreadsheets all day long, flying a desk, I'd look at those guys with envy, because they're out just partying, right? But that's their job, right? And so I built a good relationship with those business developers as, I am the technical side of the sale. Like, when you need somebody to talk the technicals, to talk the numbers, to close a deal, that's the point when you bring me along, like when you feel like you're getting to that point. And so it would always start with this first question, right? So, like, what kind of contract are you looking for? And sometimes they would know, and sometimes they wouldn't. And so I would take it further and say, are you looking for a lump sum contract relationship where, we hard bid this thing, where we are going out to the market? You are telling me that your drawings are perfect, and we are putting them in the market, and we are bidding this for the cheapest price, and we're going to go, the lowest bidder as the GC is going to win the contract, right? So is it that, or is it a negotiated contract? And naturally, I'd always try to steer them toward the negotiated contract. And so, those are the two predominant, like, contract types, right? And they both require two completely different processes in the bidding process, right? So, that first thing is, like, try to educate the client that they want a negotiated contract, and that's not solely a selfish thing. Like, yeah, naturally you want to be the person, that they decide they want to build with right there, and they're not going to go talk to anybody else. But, the risks of taking the low bid, just putting your drawings out there, having a bunch of contractors quote bid on it, and taking the low guy and sending him a contract and saying, let's build this thing, that's a very risky proposition there. And so I've executed
especially a risky proposition if you are an owner that doesn't really understand the process and the project.
Correct.
You take that risk and it's 5-10 fold. It is extremely risky, and that is the biggest, where you get the worst reputation for general contractors, is because of the uneducated owner taking the low bid and not really even understanding why the
Yeah.
bids are different. But I'm sorry to interrupt. I just want to make sure. I
No,
brought that
that's where
is
all the cliches come from.
right.
Right. And like if an owner was to go, into Google right now and type, uh, how to hire a contractor to build your project, like the only thing they're going to see is like you have to get multiples, you have to get multiple quotes and go with the low guy and all this stuff, right? It's just going to be prevalent. So if somebody is shooting for this, run of the mill, like retail level execution process on their construction project, that's what they're going to lean toward. And contractors, man, you can really take advantage of that situation. But and that's what, like, it's kind of one of those things, like when I'm building a project and we get a change order and the owner's like, oh man, these contractors love their change orders. I'm like, no, they hate change orders.
Yeah.
Right? Like, change orders are the biggest time suck and resource distractor and schedule slower. I mean, they hate change orders, right? And so, but when you back yourself into a corner and do a hard bid situation where every contract, the only contractors left standing is going to be the low guy, contractors will do, desperate times call for desperate measures, right?
Yeah.
And so contractors will do stupid things and work it out later. So I always tried to steer, our clients to a negotiated GMP situation, right? So before we get into negotiated GMP, let's just understand that there are like two, predominant contract types. The hard bid situation with the lump sum contract. Our drawings are perfect. You build it for this price. And then there's the negotiated contract, which it takes a lot more thought and work and, cooperation between the owner and the contractor. But at the end of the day, is a better situation for everybody because it creates a relationship that is likely to be repeated than the hard bid process, right? I mean, how many hard bid jobs have you built? And that was the only project you built for that owner, right? Like, you hate each other at the end. If you get out of it without suing each other, that's great. That's the win. But, in a negotiated situation, I don't think I've ever done a negotiated project with an owner who had a program to build, multiple projects to build, where we didn't build multiple projects with them, right? So, but before we go into that, let's talk about hard bidding and what a contractor has to do, the things that he has to do in order to be successful in a hard bidding situation, right? So you get something from the owner, you get drawings. Let's just say you only get drawings, right? So one of the things that contractors don't understand about hard bidding is that it's clearly it's a numbers game all the way back in the deep into the process, right? So when you're hard bidding a project, your priority is to be the first contractor into the marketplace with that project, because there's chances are that owner's talking to multiple GCs, right? And so you want to be, when the subs get an invitation to bid for that project, you want yours to be the first one. You want their mind to think of you when they think of that project, right? And so, one of the things you do when you're bringing in these projects is, like, naturally you want to understand the scope, but it's important to understand the scope on a very broad scale, to the extent that you have to build your sub list, right? So, like, what kind of subs do I need? That's the most, that's the cursory level of understanding you need of that project in order to produce an invitation to bid and start getting it out in the marketplace and start to drum up your subs. ideally, like the perfect situation was, the business developer would come to me and he said, I've got a project in Nashville, Tennessee. And, I'm sitting here in Orlando. And he's like, it's going to be an interior build out of a restaurant. It's like, okay, great. So now I know, the second he starts talking to me about it, I'm building my sub list in my head, right? And so now I might not get those drawings for a week, but I'm not letting that stop me. I'm starting to drum up subs now so that when those drawings hit, I have a sub list to publish my invitation to bid to, right? And so, you want to do everything you can to be the first, guy to the market with that project. And so when those drawings do hit, you put your invitation to bid together, and I'm going to share my screen real quick and share my invitation to bid, this kind of process that I put together. Let's see here. So this is kind of this is a template form, and it it looks red, but if you could, what I used to do is when I was running staffs, I would have templates like this, and it's like, start with this template, and all you have to do is fill in all the red, whatever's red here, you just fill that in and turn it black. And so whenever you look at it, what things you still need to come up with, right? So what I would do is I would have this set up for the project, and when the drawings would hit, I just start populating all this information, like if you want to do a pre-bid meeting on site, with the subs, which I highly encourage. When does the owner telling us that it needs to be submitted to him? And so based on that, 5 days earlier, whatever, you want the sub numbers coming in. And then fill out the owner's contact information, the site contact information, the architect. This sheet here, answering these 10 questions and having this sheet, I think it ends up being like 2 pieces of paper, right? So front and back, you have this piece of paper, and everybody who's working on this project just has this piece of paper on their desk. It has most of the information for the project that you need to know is right there, right? And so as you're filling out that information, this populates other spreadsheets in the system, and everybody's an Excel whiz at this point in our our industry. So I'm not showing anybody anything that they haven't built before, but this is just kind of how I've done it, right? So you just kind of extract, you throw some budgets in there. How much do you think the project's going to be? Is there any liquidated damages identified? Do they want a payment performance bond? Is it, OSIP, owner controlled insurance program? Is it anything like that going on? Owner direct purchase, and some of the, public work you do, owner direct purchase and stuff like that. But, you just kind of rattle through and go through these and answer these questions. And it populates, the rest of the spreadsheet, that you're going to need to work on throughout the process, right? Your general condition sheet, this is kind of where I input all of my sub numbers on bid day, and then, this is like the owner's bid form. Like if the owner gives us a bid form, this is what it would look like. And, I make all the links and then color code it, right? So this dark red is, these 2 dark red numbers, from the bid sheet, right? So that I know where to go to when I'm trying to figure out what that number is. The owner might not want that cut into 5, 6 different numbers, but I might have 2 or 3 trades bidding on that line item, right? So, you kind of take that owner's bid form and automate it so that you're not scribbling on bid day. You do spend some time, but like I said, the priority is to get this invitation to bid out to the market, right? And so a simple 1-page invitation to bid. You put your company name up here. You put your company logo here. If there's an association like the ABC or something like that you're associated with, or that, is going to catch the sub's eyes, maybe you want to put that logo there too. And then, just the information on the project. Again, this is for a petroleum station, actually, this invitation to bid, this specific one. And so, you can quickly look at the drawings and pull some, some scope and even some quantities out. So like, if you send it to a concrete guy, you're not getting that phone call like, how many square feet of concrete is it, right? like if you can quickly come up with, the building's 5,000 square feet and the apron looks like it's 50,000 square feet, you're just going to put that information in there, right? So that and the idea is you put enough scope in here for a contractor to be able to look at it and make a decision as to whether or not they want to build the project without having to pick up the phone call and talk to you, right? And so, and then you ask that they send it back, right? Like fax it back to us or email it back to us and just, I'll build the project or I won't, here's my name, I'll download the drawings or I'll get them from a plan house. Like, I don't know if you guys even do this these days, but like in Florida here locally, we have a plan house. We have a reprographics company that's like old school. I mean, you walk in there and you think you're in the 90s. But they operate, that's how they operate, man. They do a good job, So, and a lot of GCs use them still, where they'll have a plan room and the contractors can just go and print their little bid sets up and they'll mail it to them and all of that stuff. I mean, how are you guys handling that these days? Do you still do that, or is it all electronic?
Right behind me, I just actually got an updated plotter. For my old school contractors, I print out their sheets that they require. I do also, I could send them to a place to get them printed out, but since we have the plotter, I would say most of my subcontractors that are still old school are spoiled and they just email us. We print them out the sheets they ask for. But yes, there are still, it's down to maybe about 20% of the old school subs. And those are normally some of your best subs, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
Want them, they have to have them on paper. They're old school, and those are a lot of owner operator subs that the owner might be out in the field. He'll read some blueprints, does everything by hand, still old school. But yeah, a lot of people still want the paper version, especially, the owner operators for sure. And then the larger companies, everybody does the digital format now. So we send them out all digitally, and then by request, we'll print them, or you can send them to a plan house. Yep.
Yeah. So your biggest goal, like as soon as a project hits, like, I want this invitation on the street. If your project hits 9 a.m, I want that out by 2-3 p.m. in the afternoon. Like, and one of the companies that I used to work for, I came in and, they hired me as the lead pre-construction guy. And, they were like, carte blanche, whatever you want to do. I was like, okay, great. So I showed up and I just said, I'm going to sit here for a month and watch you guys. And, and I'm just going to take notes. I'm going to listen. And so at the end of that month, I realized that sometimes these guys weren't inviting subs to projects, till a week after they had it. They were doing all of the estimating and all of the takeoffs and all of the work, before they would send it out to the subs. And that was crazy to me because, you're the last contractor to the market with it. Right. And so, yes, it's important to do takeoffs and understand the scope, take off the things that are gray, like my strategy was always like, if there's something doesn't look right in the drawings, do a takeoff, but rely on the subs, understand that you have X amount of concrete, X amount of masonry, X amount of squares of roofing. I mean, you have to know those big numbers in order to be able to talk to the subs about the project. But like, you don't need to know the lineal footage of flashing, like you let the roofer do that. And you need to know that there is flashing. And if there's some weird piece of flashing somewhere, you need to make sure that somebody picked it up. But you don't have to do a full-blown takeoff, and you certainly don't have to have that before you're sending an invite out because you're late to the market at that point.
And right? I think that is a very great point. It's a very good point because that is one of the biggest hurdles to overcome as someone that's newer. One other thing that I wanted to touch on is, when you're doing this detailed package that you're putting together, one thing that newer GCs struggle with is a bid response rate. And so some of these things that you're laying out, the reason that you have a terrible bid response rate might be that, as opposed to doing what Gordon's here beginning to lay out for you, you might just be sending out the drawings with zero details, just like the owner sent you, just forwarding a drawing, asking for bids, sending it to these subs, and they've got other bids coming in, they've got active jobs. And with your little bit of effort of just sending them a PDF of a drawing, how much effort are they putting in back to you? Probably very little, and it's going to be difficult for them to justify putting in a bid when you're giving them, when you give that scope that Gordon has on the screen here, and you're showing, give that detailed scope, you kind of lay out, you're showing that you know what you're doing. You're showing you're putting in the time and the effort. Hey, here's kind of a quick synopsis of what I'm going to need. You dig in, but here's on a high level, are you to draw that interest, as opposed to them having to pull up, dig in, find all this, waste 30 minutes to even find out if you did the prep work to know if they've even got work in the job.
No, and that's terribly important. Like, and that also continues through the process too. Like, when it was brutal. Like, when I was running pre-con, I would talk so much on the phone that my jaws would hurt at the end of the day. Right? Like, I mean, that's how much I was on the phone. And so, being on the phone, calling the subs, calling the suppliers, that's a big part of it. But once you get over that kind of initial hurdle of, you have 5 or 6 or 8, hopefully, contractors in every trade who've said, yes, they're kind of interested in the job, you kind of whittle your list down to those folks, and you make calls to them fairly regularly. But what I always wanted to do was, like, when I had a call with them, I wanted to give them something. Like, I didn't want to just call and say, hey, you still interested? Here's our bid, reminding them of the bid that they have coming up. I wanted to call them and say, hey, on sheet S14, whatever, there's a pad footing there that, it doesn't match the schedule or something like that, right? And just something for them to be aware of, or to kind of generate RFIs, because that's the thing too. Like, if you can generate some RFIs and get those moving back to the architect, and get, and kind of create, if you can, as the GC who really wants this project, create an atmosphere of participation around you, those contractors are going to look at you as, this is the guy who's going to be building the job, right? And so just, a minimal amount of effort goes a very, very long way in this process, right? So let me step back in the process quickly with this. So how do you generate these subs? How do you find subs? How do you get their interest? And I will tell you that, like, a lot of my work was done in out of town situations where, I'm in Orlando and there's a project, like I said, in Nashville. So one of your best friends in that market, in any market, are the suppliers. Okay. So, like, if you can identify your concrete, your masonry, your wood suppliers, and these are people who you might not even be buying directly from, but they are critical key members on your team, because they know the good subs who pay their bills on time, who do a lot of work. They have a huge list of subs, and they are typically willing just to take that list of subs and email it to you and just say, here are the 50 people that I know who do this work in this region. Here are the 5 that I would really make sure you're talking to about this project, right? And so if you can crack like concrete, masonry, air conditioning, like Train and Carrier, those suppliers of air conditioning units, the air conditioning contractors, Square D, like all the City Electric and all those supply houses to electricians, plumb. I mean, you take every trade's buying their materials from somewhere. And so if you can try to figure out where they're buying their materials from, that's where your richest sub lists are coming from. And so And one of the other things that's pretty critical and important in drumming up subs and interest in your project is if you can go to the market, right? Like I ran a pre-construction process for a project in Nashville just a couple of years ago. It was for a large developer who is a self-performing GC, right? So they're like, we have a project that we're building in Nashville. We don't know anybody. Can you help us? And I'm like, yes. They're like, so you know people in Nashville? I'm like, no. But I can help you. I can, 2 weeks from now, I can know everybody in Nashville. And it was because I had done this in the past, right? It's simply a process, right? You hit those suppliers, you go to the town, you hit that industrial complex, those 3 or 4 industrial complex areas in those towns. You're knocking on the doors, you're talking to people. When you show up physically, like one of the things I always loved to do was I would call the suppliers, and then when I showed up in town, I'd go and I'd meet them at their office. And I'd be like, hey, I was the guy that called 2 weeks ago. Because how many times has somebody called you just never met them, right? They just go off into oblivion. And so people always are just like, oh my gosh, you're a human being. And I'm like, yeah, this is me, right? Like, thanks for your help, can I take you out to lunch, whatever, right? And so,
these are the differentiators. Those are differentiators. Those are how you set yourself apart in the market. That's awesome. Very inspiring. And yeah, that shows you do take the real time, the real effort. So that's awesome. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
And you're in the market anyway. You got to eat lunch. You don't know anybody yet. So you've been on the phone 3 or 4 times with suppliers. Go talk to that human, and go, and then, he's going to think about, you're going to be at the forefront of his mind for the rest of the time you're working on that project, right? Like, if he talks to somebody, he's just going to be constantly sending you unsolicited, subs that might not be working on it and stuff like that. So, and then they have friends too, like that, they have friends in other, construction materials, trades that, who do I need to be talking? You're constantly prospecting. You're just digging deeper and deeper and deeper, trying to find that vein of gold, right? And so, and this is, this can be done. I would do the same process on a, 5,000 square foot restaurant build out in a little retail space. I'd go to a town and you'd spend a couple days. I would print up drawings and FedEx them to the location and, set up a table and have, subs come by and pick up drawings and shake their hand, just those little things they go a long way in communicating that you're serious about winning that project, So that's, there's a whole bid process associated with the hard bidding situation too. That's probably a whole other module. We don't have time to even talk about it today. But I also wanted to talk about let me stop my share here. I wanted to talk about the GMP process, which is totally different, right? The GMP process, you're still probably going to be talking to suppliers and things of that nature, the same way that you would be in the hard bid situation. But in a GMP, your priority is different. And so I've said this a couple times, and if you have one takeaway from this, it's what is the priority for each of these, right? The priority for the hard bid situation, is that you are the first to the market, right? Like your priority is to be the first person to the whole market with an invitation to bid for that project. That's the priority. The priority on a GMP, I believe, is understanding the client's priority with respect to the project. And so I say that because typically in a GMP situation, you have a more sophisticated owner who either understands business or really is like, like, for example, the example I use for my hard bidding was like gas station, restaurant. The example that I use for GMP is medical research facility. right? So like, you're building like a medical research facility for a massive company, and it's maybe a 50, $60 million project. And, they're more sophisticated. They know what they want. They know what they need. And so your priority there is to understand what their need is, because once you understand what their priority is and what their need is, everything else is kind of negotiable, right? And so, like, for example, like you have a medical research facility, and their priority is to to do these lab tests. Their priority is the labs, and to create a situation where, one, their labs are operating in perfect condition, and two, they have an auditorium where they want to do some teaching of their staff, right? So you have these two things that they really want badly. Everything, your specs have to be tight and perfect in those situations, but everything else is pretty much negotiable. So that's where you go to work, doing what I call the design bid process, right? Because in a negotiated situation, typically you're coming in very early in the process, maybe 30% design drawings, right? Conceptual design drawings where they have schematics, and it's just kind of like this mess. And you take that and you do a internal budget on, this is what we think the medical research facility is going to cost. But then you take that conceptual design and you work with the architect and you work with the owner to try and trim the fat. Like, if we're speccing stuff over here that aren't a part of your priority, let's look at a different spec to save you money, right? If your building is this certain ridiculously expensive building process, and you don't really care, too much about what the exterior looks like, well, let's attack that a different way, right? And save piles of money for you so that we can get within your budget, right? So in that, let's back up very briefly in that negotiated process. So typically what you do too, which is beneficial, is I always try to secure a pre-construction agreement also in those negotiated contracts. And have you been successful at going into pre-construction agreements, Tony?
Yeah, so I have been burned enough times to be forced to do that. So I have put in the work, and that is one of the biggest pitfalls for contractors that are not experienced in the design, build, negotiated contract. Is you can spend months and months with these people, going back and forth, helping them through the design process, basically doing consulting work for free if you do not get something inked. And you're not inking an agreement that they're going to use you. You're just inking an agreement for all of this initial time where you are basically consulting for free and helping them. And then you have to also, exactly what you said, you have to then find those subs in that design process and, work with them. And I'll let you go into more detail with that, but it's extremely important.
Yeah. So what I would do, and I had it down to like literally a 1-page letter contract, right? I mean, this isn't an elaborate contract. Like, this is a pre-construction services agreement. And the nature of it is if you build the project with us, this agreement goes away. Like, you don't owe the bill, right? If you decide that you don't want to build it with us, or that you don't build it at all, then you owe us and I would keep it. I want a reimbursement of our costs, right? I mean, I'm not looking to make money on a pre-construction agreement, right? I'm looking to not go broke and out of business pre-constructing everything for everybody, right? And so, but the rub is you got to provide good deliverables. I mean, you got to provide solid deliverables to the owner. And so, and the GMP is also a pretty open book process too, and I always try to negotiate GMPs with general contractors, with me being the owner, because I'm a little bit more of a sophisticated owner, and so I can run a GMP process a lot. It's a lot more. I'm more comfortable with a GMP than I am a hard bid situation, and um, so that pre-construction agreement is like, I'm going to be giving you deliverables over the next months, and if you build it with us, great. If you don't, you owe us a reimbursement of our costs. And so, I would say, like, what's that?
Can you go through just a quick synopsis of that? What would be the deliverables you would give them?
Okay,
Just give me,
so
roll me
that's
off
a good
couple
question.
deliverables.
Yeah, that's a good question. And let me share with you another screen that is, it's a tool that you have to use in the bid process, and you've seen it 100,000 times, I'm sure, the bid tab. But this is this is the bid tab that I would use to bid, to work on projects. So essentially, you have a workbook for every trade. I mean, I've got probably 50 workbooks in here, right? And so by division, right? And so the deliverable, the main deliverable that you produce is you're working in meetings. Like, you might have a weekly or bi-weekly meeting with the design team and the owner, where you discuss the development of the project, right? But it all starts with, you'll do at the 30% design drawings, you would do a budget, an internal budget, and that internal budget is like, we built medical research facilities. We have 2 of them going on right now. This is how much they're costing per square foot. And you put some other screws to it, like, what kind of exhaust system you have. Is your vivarium X amount of square foot? What's your square footage of lab versus vivarium versus educational space versus, all this other stuff, right? And so you crunch it based on square footage of areas, and you come up with a really educated budget. And you also work to break it down into sub trades. So, your deliverable at the end of the day might look a little bit more like the owner's bid form, like, this form here that I showed you before. Like, this might be your deliverable to them for your budget. And then you're also going to have qualifications and assumptions, like, how did we come up with these numbers, right? So you're going to, it's going to be a budget, and it's going to be qualifications and assumptions. And that's how you, that's a deliverable to them. And then you take that 30% budget and you say, here's how we get there. The qualifications kind of communicate how you get there, right? But then those qualifications have to make themselves into the design on the next round. So, you work with the architect and the owner, and sometimes the owner says, I don't like 5 of these qualifications here, and this looks good. So let's get rid of these 5 qualifications. If I got to spend another $1 million or $2 because of that, that's fine, right? Like, that's, we'll add that to the budget. So it's a back and forth between the owner and the contractor and the designers. It's this big circle. That's why I call it design bid, right?
Yeah, and it allows them to say, okay, here's what we see as a budget from experience and what's going on in the current market. And, if we're way over budget before these drawings are so far along, they're in the 30% stage, we can make these major modifications to the drawings to get it closer to that owner's budget. Something else that you're going to want in a 30%, qualifications, assumptions, budget, you're going to want a contingency on top of this. You have all this, and then you're going to put a larger contingency, maybe upwards of like 10% almost of your bid be contingency, because we only have 30% drawing. So
Yeah.
that's important as well. But yeah, go ahead. So that's perfect what you've laid out.
Yeah, I totally forgot the contingency element. And so, the contingency is going to start big and get smaller and smaller and smaller, right? And the idea is that, by the time you're going to contract, on something big and complex like this, your confidence level is such that that contingency should be 1.5%, 2%, at the end of the process, right? And so, and your budget hasn't changed much at all. Like ideally, your budget has stayed the same. But yeah, that's a great point on contingency. So then you're going to do a second round of pricing. You're typically going to do 3 rounds of pricing before you're going to contract, right? And the second round is a design development, kind of pricing effort. And that design development pricing effort, this is where you bring in your subs. And I say subs, you want to bring in that one favorite sub per trade. And I don't mean your brother-in-law. I mean, like, who is best suited in your arsenal to build that project, right? If it's a gas station, it's this guy. If it's a medical research facility, it's this guy, right? And so, you pick that list of favorites that you want to use, and you're open with everybody about it. You tell the owner, this is who we want to use when we build the project. And you tell the sub, you're who we want to use when we build this project. You also tell the sub that you have to bid this out in the market competitively when the drawings are completely, designed, and that it's essentially their project to lose. You're talking to them right now because you want to build this project with them. That's a fact. But you also, need to understand that we have to bid it out into the marketplace to see where the numbers fall, just to keep everybody honest too, right? So that first kind of design development, might be a 60% to 80% drawing that you send out to the marketplace, and you get sub input, and that's really gonna correct your internal budget that you did initially. And it's also going to engage those contractors to provide value engineering. So at this point, you want to start talking about VE, cost engineering, whatever you want to call it. And that is when you start to see, hey, if you change this, you'll save this from each of these subs. And you can really come up with a great list to help manage your budget. And again, like you said, your contingency is going to shrink a little bit, but it's probably because you're taking money from contingency and solidifying it in the budget with this, with your contractor numbers, right?
Correct. Yep.
And then, you're going to do a round of pricing out to the whole marketplace when you have permit drawings. Hopefully that design development, that construction drawing development phase kind of, generated enough interest where you can tweak the drawing and get it submitted for permit. And so once that's submitted for permit, then you typically, when you're a month or so out from getting your permit in your hand, you're going out to the entire market with the project and getting it bid out with subs. And hopefully, the market kind of confirms your favorite subs number. And even if it doesn't, there have been a number of times where, my favorite contractor wasn't the low number. I mean, it's not uncommon in a GMP situation where, the person who you end up using is not the lowest sub in the marketplace, right? So what's good for the GC in that situation is also good for the sub market, too. And
right,
and
yeah, because
so
it's not, especially in this type of a situation, when you have, let's say you have a sub where that sub has not only been in communication with you, they've been in communication with the owner. They have shown they are educated on the project. They've shown that they're invested in the project. They've shown that they're going to do it exactly as the owner wants. And some of those things, when you discuss at that sub, even if he does come in, let's say 10 or 15% higher, that's not 10 or 15% of the whole job. It's 10 or 15% of his trade, maybe is 1 to 2% of the total job price difference.
Right.
And that owner is already comfortable with that sub. So, you know, having that conversation with them, explaining, hey, well, here's what we're going to get with this sub. Even though it's a little bit more, we know that they completely understand the scope. We know they have priced everything right. They've been through the whole process. So that, and coupling all that and going through the process, having that sub, you have educated the owner. All of these things make a big difference. And then, you know, the little bit of difference in price, you know, that might be that you can tell the owner, hey, this guy's going to get everything done on time, on schedule. He has the experience. The other number is lower, but that doesn't mean they're going to hit the schedule, the time frame. They don't have the manpower set aside for it. There's tons of different things, that components that come into play. So
Yeah.
it's not always all price. Especially in this type of a situation, you can definitely sell it in other fashions, which is the thing I love the most about it, because you get the most quality product at the end of the day.
Oh yeah. It's it's a real team effort across the board, you know, you know, even when things come up in the field, they always do, you know, everybody's started with a cooperation mindset, right?
Yep.
But, you know, one of the biggest deliverables here is actually, you know, these bid tab sheets that you would do for every sub, because you go through these with the owner, where you build the scope for that trade. In this case, it's steel. You know, you would build that scope out here for the project, and then you'd have all your subs up in here on these line items, and then their pricing, you know, running through. And so when this is filled out, you know, man, it's a rich situation. And so what, you know, the ultimate in a GMP relationship with an owner is where, you know, you sign off with the owner in this signature block on each of the, you know, on each of the bid tabs. So you use this as a purchasing element where, you know, the contractor and the owner, the GC and the owner, bind themselves to this, you know, this bid tab, and saying that, like, this is our understanding of what the scope and cost are for the plumber that we've been talking to the whole time, right? Mm-hmm. And so this is many times, like, my deliverable goes from, you know, 2 to 5 sheets of you know, a bid form and qualifications, to a binder full of these bid tabs and quotes and everything like that I'm giving to the owner, right? Like, you know, that's the deliverable that they get, you know, this rich data set of exactly what it costs to build their project, right? And they can take that and budget other projects, you know, and you know, it's a really, really solid deliverable at the end of the day, for the owners. And, you know, and it's a good, you know, it's the GMP is a great, you know, is a great way to just, you know, show owners how smart you are and how good you are, and how much they want to, you know, they'll want to work with you again. I mean, it's just, you know, I never met a hard bid that I didn't hate, and I never met a GMP that I didn't love, right? So,
yeah. Well, that really embodies, you know, the GMP to me really embodies the professional contractor. Anybody can go into a bid situation and do the low bid, right? Now, the low bid doesn't mean they're going to perform the project to the owner's expectations. As a matter of fact, that's normally where they are not producing the project to the owner's expectations. The GMP, you know, you're just exactly what you went through, and the detail that you went through with that, what the owner gets on the front end, that continues normally throughout the entirety of the project, and it builds a long-term relationship for future projects. I mean, typically, if you are with an educated, developing owner, they are going to this is not the only project they're ever going to do. They're going to want to continue to do projects, right? And so what you're doing is you're differentiating yourself from the market, proving your value and proving your long-term worth as a partner for them in the long run. And as any successful general contractor who's wanting to grow, that is the route that you want to pursue for long-term growth and expansion of your company, and, you know, to build those long-term relationships with clients so you can begin to get steady long-term work, right? In order to grow. But Gordon, this has been an amazing time. I think you're extremely detailed in what you've done. And so a couple of things I kind of want to go over for anybody listening, right? So one, a general contractor that would want to, get in touch with you, are you going to think about providing a package that someone could purchase from you, maybe a thinned down version of what you have and then a full version of what you have? Or maybe are you thinking about ever doing any coaching for GCs with this type of stuff? I think all the things, all the knowledge that you have so many things that they can offer the GC community. So I just kind of want to touch on that and see what your thoughts are for the future.
So I am in the process of developing some of that stuff. It's, I try to put myself in the contractor's shoes too, right? So, so much of a contractor's ability, it'd be great if I could put these spreadsheets together and just throw them out there and say, have at it, right? And I don't see that there's anything wrong with that, but every contractor, even every owner, is a very detailed and custom situation, right? And so, yes, I am planning on doing some generic high level discussions like this, breaking, like this can be broken down into 4 or 5 modules in itself, what we've talked about today, right? How to perform on bid day when you're hard bidding, right? Like how to package something to the owner in a GMP situation and conduct those meetings, right? So all of those can be broken down. But what I'm finding is like the best thing to do is to have a conversation, whether that's a 30-minute conversation like this with someone, and having that conversation, I can pinpoint what your pain points are. And I've got piles of spreadsheets built for all sorts of situations. I've got piles of contracts written for all sorts of situations, but if I can pull together 2 or 3 of those and tweak them even a little bit and get them to somebody, I think that that's probably more beneficial, right? So that's kind of where maybe coaching comes into play or something like that. But for right now, it's kind of a case by case situation, and you can reach me via email and LinkedIn, and those are the 2 places where
What is the best method for someone who just wants to connect with you, get maybe a consultation to understand how you two can align and where you can, fill in and guide them through processes to help them grow?
Yeah, sure. Probably email is the best way to do it. Just if you drop that into the show notes, I guess, can you do that?
Yeah,
just put my email in there.
Go ahead and say it since somebody's
it's Gordon. Yeah, it's Gordon, Gordon at Finn Advisors Corp. That's Finn like a shark fin. Advisors with an S, corp like corporation.com. So, and then LinkedIn, it's Gordon Davis. You'll see I got a headshot of my bald head in the LinkedIn there. And so if you look up Finn Advisors, Finn Construction too. I have a license in the state of Florida, but I don't practice. But I have that out there too. But if you bounce around and you see that I've got kind of a wave like I have in the background, that's kind of what my logo looks like too. So and yours too. You have a C, you got the same artwork.
I got the C wave too. The other thing, I want to make sure people understand, Gordon is not just in Florida, it's throughout the US. So if you have something anywhere in the United States, he will be able to guide and help anybody. So it doesn't matter what state you're in, please do reach out to him. He would be a great asset for you if you're wanting to grow and get your GC company to a level way beyond where you are now. He will help you eliminate your limiting beliefs on where you can go. So I think he is a valuable asset and someone to definitely consult with and bring along. It's well worth your investment, the time and the energy. Gordon, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah.
Hopefully we'll be able to get you on again. I'm going to have down in the show notes, you'll see his prior video that he did with Greg Dickerson, who is a mutual coach of ours, a great gentleman and a great person somebody else to reach out to for business advice. Gordon Davis, thanks again so much for joining us. We sincerely appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Have a great holiday.
You too, sir.
All right.